Thank you all for having me today. I was just telling Stephen that I actually had Chipotle for dinner, so I now feel much better about the whole thing. So I guess I'll start with the history, and then if you guys have questions or want to interrupt me, or just let me know as we go. I started Aspire. It'll be 5 years ago in April, basically. So we're almost to 5 years. I work with business owners who are trying to figure out how to grow their business. So essentially, it's business coaching and consulting. My background, I guess, just to give you a little bit of flavor, just so it kind of makes sense. When I got out of college, I took a job with, at the time, it's Anderson Consulting. It's Accenture now. Very large consulting company, basically worldwide, 100,000 employees. Primarily work with Fortune 500 type companies. Took a job actually with the Kansas City office. Was here for about 6 months, and then they promptly sent me out of town for the next 7 years, which at that time was fine. I would, out of school, it's kind of fun to travel. At some point, that gets old when you're going to the airport every single weekend. But it was a great opportunity. Got to travel. Got to go to Australia for a couple of years with that. So it can't really complain. It was a pretty cool deal. From there, I decided after I got married and we bought a house and I was still traveling, I'm like, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this. So decided to leave there. Took a job in town with Sprint PCS, which was the wireless side of Sprint. Was one of the first 300 employees on the wireless side, so that was kind of fun. Technically, it was a startup. They had $10 billion in funding, but it was still technically a startup. And it was pretty amazing. I mean, you had that much money, that big of a thing that they were trying to do, and it was some pretty cool stuff to be able to sit in the room with some of the senior executives who were debating how are we going to do this, what's important, how do you roll this out. So some really really good opportunities to learn a lot. Unfortunately, after about 3 or 4 years of that, the rest of Sprint got involved. And it was no longer a startup mentality. It was kind of that wireline mentality that's been around for years, and it was a lot less fun at that point. So I stuck around there probably longer than I should have. Ended up taking a package and was going to buy a business or start a business, and I couldn't find anything I liked. I went through, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Kaufman Fast Track, went through Fast Track with an idea, kind of got to the end of it, I'm like, well, that sucks, I don't want to do that. which was actually a positive outcome, because you want to decide, is this something I want to do or not?
Shawn, why did you say you wanted to buy or start a business coming out of that, getting that package? Why not go get another job?
A couple of reasons. One, at the level that I was at, so I was an assistant vice president, which at Sprint was a pretty good level. At the level I was at, finding another job in Kansas City was going to be difficult. And I wanted to stay here. So that was part of it. The other part was, having spent that much time in the corporate world, you talked about being cynical, so I don't want to incite the fury of the cynical crowd, but corporate world's kind of not much fun. It's a great place to learn. There's a ton of money to be made, but it's also really frustrating because it's hard to actually get anything done. So when you've got a Fortune 100 company that's out there spending huge dollars, it's kind of the equivalent of an aircraft carrier trying to navigate, and it doesn't turn very well. And so any corporate job, you're kind of stuck. You're doing your thing, and for me at that point, I wanted something different, which, as it turns out, didn't quite work out the way I planned. So I couldn't find a job, or I couldn't find a business I wanted to buy. Nothing really came to me, so I went back into consulting. Independent, I just kind of found my own thing. So I was an independent consultant for about a year at H&R Block, which was fascinating. I learned a lot more about taxes than I ever wanted to know. Learned that I didn't really want to work at H&R Block either, so that kind of reconfirmed the whole corporate thing for me. And then I got recruited by a company that developed software for the telecom industry, and I ignored them for about 6 months. They kept calling, and I was like, I don't want to go back into telecom. I'm not interested. They found a guy that was pretty persuasive, and he got me at least to get on a plane and go to Atlanta and talk to them. and he talked me into taking a job to start a consulting division in Kansas City for their software company. And so that part of it was pretty cool. I hired 50 or 60 people, kind of created a software or a consulting division. The drawback was that the client was Sprint. And so I was immediately right back where I had started, 2 or 3 years ago. Money was great, but it was just more of the same. It was all about politics. It was all about just, trying to manipulate the bureaucracy. And I just got to the point where I physically hated going to work. I'm like, I hate my life. Why am I doing this? And so that's when I kind of just said, you know what, that's it. I need to do something different. Left, took some time off, read a ton of books, the what should I do with my life type of books. And not sure that I completely solved it, but at least came up with some things that I was interested in. And that drove me down the path of what do I like to do? I like to solve problems. I like, to work with businesses and figure out what's working and what's not working. And I like to help people find success. And I like to do that with people that are actually active and excited and trying to get something done. So you kind of wash all those around and combine them together, and I came up with this concept of business coaching, which even then, 5 years ago, there were business coaches around. It's a lot more prevalent now than it was then. But doing some research, what I liked about it was there was a model out there where you could actually make money. Working with entrepreneurs and startups and small businesses. The biggest hurdle that I had to get over before I started it was, okay, small business owner by definition doesn't have much money. Corporate consulting has a lot of money. I mean, they're able to throw a couple $100 an hour at you, and that adds up really quickly. So was there a way to package this thing so that it made sense? So a couple things happened. The first thing was being able to kind of create at least a program or a set of, how would I package these services so that a small business could actually afford it. And then secondly was a realization on my part of, okay, how much do I actually have to make? Which is a long drawn out process that I encourage everyone to go through at some point in their life, and probably multiple times. But I got to the point where I'm like, all right, well, as long as I make, this amount, I'm okay. And which was quite a bit less than what I was making before. And you start rationalizing things and figure out what works. And money, sad to say, isn't necessarily everything. It makes it easier if it is, but the reality is, for me at least, it got to the point where I'd much rather be doing something I enjoy and making a difference than just cashing a check. So everybody's mileage may vary. You're going to figure that out on your own, but that was my experience. So that led me to starting Aspire. I ended up joining a group called the Professional Business Coaches Alliance, which was a group of coaches, obviously professional business coaches, that was started in Canton, Ohio. This guy had started this 5 or 6 years prior, had really developed a system, had developed tools, and it allowed me for a fairly low cost to be able to look over his shoulder, borrow his tools, borrow his stuff, and be able to use that as my starting point and customize it for what I was going to offer. First year was challenging, more challenging than I thought it would be. It was one of those things where literally, because of my work at Sprint, I knew thousands of people in Kansas City. Sadly, and I didn't really think about this until 2 or 3 months after I started the business, all of those thousands of people either worked at Sprint or were other consultants. None of them owned a small business. So I was essentially completely starting from scratch, which is where Stephen's story about getting into networking came into play. Because I kind of started, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I don't know anybody who would actually buy my services. Where do you find them? And so, you start going to networking events.
Shawn, can I ask 2 questions?
Yeah.
One, give us some timeline so they know what year you're talking about.
So when I started Aspire, it would have been 2007.
Okay, and those people you were talking to, did they tell you it was a good idea? Or like, attaboy, go do it? Or they're like, oh, I don't know if that's a really good business idea?
It was a mixed bag. So it's interesting, and I see that with my clients too. I think you get the people that are like, hey, that makes sense. Sounds like you thought it through. That should work. And then you get other people that, in some cases, I think they're just envious that they're not willing to make the jump. And you get a lot of negativity. Oh, man, I don't see any way you can make that work. There's no way that's going to fly. You try to stay away from those people after you have about one or two discussions, because the more you hear that, the more it just kind of drags you down. So it was a mixed bag. Trying to remember where I was now.
That takes us to networking, 2000.
Right. So getting started, first year, all right, hang up the shingle, put up the website, literally don't know any small business owners. Start networking, that's where I got introduced to Stephen, and he was going through his manic phase of networking. Yeah.
Have you ever gone to any Vistage meetings? Are you familiar with the group?
I am familiar with Vistage, and actually I offer a product that kind of is similar to Vistage as well.
Because that would be loaded with small business owners.
Although by definition they're already getting help, so it does make it a little bit tricky. But
sure,
yeah, you're right.
From one another.
Then there's Vistage coaches too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So in theory, they're already paying somebody for what I would be offering them.
Quite a bit.
Yes. Yeah. Vistage is an interesting model. I'd be glad to compare and contrast. So getting started was then just a matter of going out and trying to meet people. And what I discovered, and I don't know if you discovered this, took you a little bit, you took a different path, but you have a different business. But what I discovered after 7 or 8 months was, hey, this is great. I've met a ton of people. I've landed, I think at that point I had landed maybe one paying client and one that wanted to pay but didn't have any money, which, by the way, not really a great way to grow your business. And I realized, all right, so this networking thing is fine. You meet a lot of people. It's a great way to kind of start a presence, but it wasn't moving me forward. So at that point I had to try some new strategies. So I basically made the commitment at that point that I was going to start doing workshops, getting up in front of people, doing some sort of educational training at least once a month. Whether I had to set that up on my own or whether I had to go through a chamber or some other group, but I had to commit to that. The other thing I committed to, and I had already started this, I was blogging. So I was writing blog posts probably two to three times a week. I've now cut down to one a week, which is plenty. And then doing a monthly newsletter that came out, on a very consistent basis that reused a lot of the stuff that I put in my blog. So the combination of those things led me to the opportunity to meet people who might be prospects and to be able to say, all right, hey, I know you're probably not ready to just throw money at me. Why don't you come to a workshop, see if it makes sense, see if you learn anything, and when it makes sense, give me a call and let's see if I can help you. And slowly but surely, that started working.
Brad Alpers was in here a couple weeks ago, and he talked about blogging driving a lot of business for him. Did that happen for you too? Someone read a blog article and said, you know what, we should probably work together.
Indirectly. So for Brad, it's a little bit easier because it's a product, and it was kind of a clear cut, I didn't even know they made, steel drinking things, whatever it might be. Indirectly for me, because services are harder to buy, what it did was it created credibility because people could say, okay, I get it. He seems to know what he's talking about. Obviously, if they didn't think I knew what I was talking about, then they just moved on. But either way, it gave me the opportunity to at least get to know them from that, from a virtual sense. The other thing that it did is it really increased my search engine optimization. So, if you go to Google and type in Kansas City Business Coach, I'm going to come up on the first, one or two slides. And that was on purpose, so that was working on that quite a bit. Drawback is there's not a ton of people that are typing in Kansas City Business Coach, so you can't really count on that to drive your business all by itself. But yeah, it definitely helped in terms of just being able to kind of make people better understand what was going on. And then from there, I think the biggest thing that I've done to kind of get to where I've wanted to be is just consistency. So once you start finding some things that work, and I see this with my clients all the time, they get real excited about something, they'll do it for a month or two, they get busy, and then they stop doing it from a marketing perspective, and all that momentum goes away. And so it's that consistency that, whether it's advertising, whether it's networking, whether it's blogging, whether it's a newsletter, whatever it is, you got to be really consistent. So that's been one of the things that I think has really helped me as much as anything.